Good morning, everyone. We're just going to give everyone just a short minute to make sure they're logged in and ready to join. Okay, looks like we have everyone in so far. I just want to take this opportunity to welcome everyone, and I just want to introduce myself. My name is Jennifer Vieira. I'm very freshly new to the CPCO team. I just joined a month ago as the manager of the Catholic Leadership Development Services Department, and I just want to take a moment to give a shout out and thank you to Luciana Cardarelli, who is well on her way to retirement now. So I'm very honored to be in this position and to join you all here today. Thank you so much to everyone for taking the time to be with us today, especially in your busy schedules, to engage in today's learning and collaboration. We are just a few days away from March break, so I know this is a really exciting and week that I know means everything to a lot of people, given how busy we are in our roles. So thank you for taking the time as well. I would just invite you to use your chat function throughout the webinar today. Any questions, comments you have, and I would just ask if you wouldn't mind just starting off by popping your name into the chat. Maybe tell us where you're from, anything you'd like us to know about you as we begin today and building our learning community together. Today's webinar basically culminates a two-year project between OPC, CPCO, and ADFO. And over this time, the team has engaged in collaboration with the Ministry of Education to bring you this series, which is focused on the implementation of the language curriculum grades 1 to 8, but very much from a leadership lens. It has been a phenomenal series, which has included looking at evidence of impact, very focused and intentional leadership moves and strategies, and of course, collaborative inquiry with the development of lots of rich resources. So very excited to begin the webinar today. Thank you everyone for putting in your information in the chat. And as mentioned, we're going to check the chat throughout, so please feel free to throw in any questions or comments along the way throughout the webinar. So at this time, I'm going to pass it off to Lawrence.
Good morning, everyone, and welcome. My name is Lawrence Demera. I'm a professional learning consultant with the Ontario Principals Council, and we want to make sure that we get our session started off in a good way this morning. So we will acknowledge that we live, work, and derive benefit from being on the ancestral lands that have always been home to the Anishinaabe and the Amishkigo peoples, who are the inherent right holders of these territories. As partners in public education, I think we have a duty to learn, understand, and redress the historic and ongoing impacts of colonialism. And individually and collectively, we have a responsibility to reconcile our relationship both with the land and with the original peoples. I'm connecting today from the shores of Georgian Bay, where I acknowledge the people of the Three Fires, known as the Ojibwe, the Odawa, and the Potawatomi nations, also known as the Saugeen Ojibwe Nation. And I think, you know, in reflecting on our shared journey towards reconciliation, it's really crucial that we reflect on and consider the importance of reciprocal relationships. I think they require us to engage in genuine dialogue, to listen deeply, and to learn from one another. And it's through building these relationships that I think we are able to focus on and recognize the rights, knowledge, and experiences of Indigenous communities and actively support their self-determination. I think it's only through such collaborations that we can work towards healing, understanding, and creating new stories for all who call this their land their home. If you would like, I would encourage you to please share the land that you're connecting from or acknowledge the land that you're connecting from in the chat box now.
Good morning and welcome. My name is Lorraine Boulos, and I'm a retired elementary principal with the Halton Catholic District School Board. And I'm speaking to you today from Burlington, which is part of the Treaty Lands and Territory of the Mississaugas of the Credit.
Hello, everyone. My name is Usha James. I'm the Executive Director of the Critical Thinking Consortium, and I'm on the traditional territory here in downtown Toronto of obviously many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples. And obviously, this space is current home of many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people. And very quickly, the home of the Critical Thinking Consortium, which is our home base is actually in Vancouver, is on the traditional ancestral and unceded territory of the Musqueam people. And we recognize that as an organization that in many locations where we facilitate and where we operate, we work on treaty land where treaties are not upheld, as well as in unceded territories where land was forcefully taken. And we also recognize that the creation and enforcement of those treaties has caused significant harms. And so we are constantly thinking about how do we recognize, acknowledge, and actively work to both uh, uh, not perpetuate that harm and to advance in ways that we haven't before those inherent rights of the folks where we are, the territories where we're living.
Good morning. My name is Teresa Powley, and I'm the CPCO lead for this project and a retired principal from the Toronto Catholic District School Board. I'm speaking to you today from the Toronto region, situated upon traditional territories of the Anishinaabe, the Haudenosaunee Confederacy, and the Wendat peoples.
Good morning, all. My name is Carla Robbins, OPC lead for this project and retired elementary principal from the Toronto District School Board. I proudly live and work on the traditional territory of many nations, including the Michi-Saagiig, Anishinaabe, and the Ojibwe. This land, not now known as the Town of Blue Mountains in Grey County, continues to be home to diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. They have definitely been caretakers of this beautiful land for generations, and I'm so proud to be able to enjoy the space of Georgian Bay and the lands around here. Today, we're also very pleased to welcome some guest principals, Lindsay Borden, Andrea Carnegie, and Carol Pescuzzo, who are here for today's webinar. We value learning from colleagues across the province to gain diverse perspectives in school improvement learning. We are extremely grateful for Lindsay and Andrea and Carol for giving their time, as we know it is a busy time of the year, and we're looking forward to hear their journeys from their schools. We look forward to deepening our learning and understanding as members of this provincial learning community today. Teresa?
Thank you, Carla. As Jennifer mentioned in her welcome, last year, with the support of the Ministry of Education, the Ontario Principal Associations were able to provide a range of professional learning opportunities, as well as a resource document for school leaders to help them in leading the implementation of the language curriculum. The professional learning opportunities are listed on this slide, and they included a series of 3 webinars that address the key changes in the language curriculum. We also produced 3 podcasts focused on a critical inquiry approach to implementation of the curriculum, as well as a leadership support document which aligned with the key changes chart that was developed by the Ministry of Education. All of last year's resources can be found on the OPC and CPCO website, and we've included a QR code on this slide for both associations for easy access to all of last year's resources. Today's webinar is a continuation of that work with a very particular focus on equity-driven school improvement planning. Throughout last year's work, we relied heavily on a number of excellent ministry resources, and they are listed here for you. All of these resources can be found on the ministry page and are linked on this slide for easy access. This school year, we have offered 2 webinars focused on the goals that are noted on this slide. Webinar 1, which took place in the fall, is posted already on the OPC and CPCO websites. And in our first webinar, we introduced the new document, Equity-Driven Leadership for School Improvement Planning, which has been shared with you all. And today we hope to further explore this document and deepen our learning about equity-focused leadership and school learning and improvement, all within the context of leading implementation of the language curriculum. Carla?
Yeah. So we do know that some of you were unable to join us for webinar number 1. So we're just going to take a little moment just to review the resource as posted on the screen that was created last year. You'll notice in the graphic representation a framework that reflects our current thinking for school improvement planning. This graphic synthesizes the essential elements of the process. Number 1, understanding the learner, knowing your students, deeply valuing their identities and recognizing their strengths. Also co-constructing goals, which is setting those meaningful equity-driven literacy goals in collaboration with your staff and school community, school community. And lastly, interpreting and responding to data, using evidence to inform decisions and drive impactful change. Beyond the framework itself, the resource embeds opportunities for school leaders to engage in deep learning and reflection with their staff through possible leadership moves to take action, staff inquiry questions to guide meaningful discussions, and evidence of impact indicators to measure progress and effectiveness. We believe each element is designed to create space for reflection and thoughtful leadership. When school leaders take time to examine their leadership approaches, identities, and privileges, we believe that they are better equipped to drive transformational change in their schools. The link to the document is provided for your reference. Take a moment to reflect on how this resource can support your leadership in your particular school context. When you're ready, we invite you to share your thinking in the chat to answer one of these questions. We want to know what resonates most with you. And possibly, how have you used or how do you plan to use this resource in your leadership work? I'm going to count on my colleagues just to see if there's anyone who's sharing any information in the chat. We want to get a sense of just how this has been sort of helping you in your journey in your schools. And is there anything that is notable to share at this time?
Yeah, we have Sean sharing, interpreting and responding to data, which is ongoing. Also, Shannon talks about re-examining our use of data and responding to the data.
I really enjoy that they're hearing about the data, and we'll hear more about that in our presentations today. We understand that that's so important, a critical piece in understanding the learner and really making decisions on those next steps for learning for school staff and for meeting the needs of students in your particular context. Thank you, Jennifer.
And Vanessa has also shared equitable assessment using triangulation of data.
Thank you. Please continue to share those ideas. That may be helpful for your colleagues to sort of see how you've used those resources, and it may just sort of trigger, those next steps for folks when they're finished this webinar today. So thank you for those who were able to participate in the chat today. As school leaders, we play a critical role in shaping literacy learning that is inclusive, affirming, and equitable. The 2024 Leadership Resource captures our current thinking about what intentional and sustained equity-focused leadership looks like in action. To truly embed equity in literacy learning, we believe that it's important to ensure human rights, equity, and inclusion are at the center of all curriculum decisions. Champion inclusive literacy programs that reflect and respect the diverse identities, lived experiences, and abilities of students, and dismantle oppressive and discriminatory practices. Equity-driven leadership requires culturally responsive, relevant pedagogies, evidence-based practices, and thoughtful resource allocation to remove barriers to learning. By thoughtfully engaging staff in collaborative critical inquiry, a process that is iterative and responsive, continuously reflecting on evidence, gathering feedback, and making intentional leadership moves, we believe leaders will definitely create the conditions where every student can learn and obviously thrive. The school improvement planning process is not just about setting goals, as we know. It's about engaging in deep transformative learning. It requires the time, space, and professional learning opportunities that allow educators to think critically about their practices. This approach is grounded in inquiry, but it goes beyond simply asking questions. It's about probing deeper into student learning and teaching practices, gathering and analyzing evidence to inform decisions, and reflecting on and refining practices to drive continuous improvement. Thanks to our friend and colleague, Usha James, I'm going to share a little bit from her, where she explains a critical inquiry approach to professional learning needs intentional time, space, and structure to be meaningful. When these conditions are in place, educators can engage in an ongoing cycle of learning and growth, ultimately leading to better student outcomes. With this in mind, let's consider the graphic on this slide, which is also embedded throughout the resource. It reminds us that there are multiple entry points into this work. No single starting point exists. The work done during teacher moderation or class profile meetings might provide opportunities to enter into the work through the knowing the learner component. The inquiry questions could serve as entry points during professional learning networks or perhaps during divisional meetings, while the evidence of impact indicators provides entry points during instructional rounds or during discussions focused on monitoring of school improvement plans. School leaders will find their own way in based on their school's unique needs, their leadership values, and their approach to curriculum implementation. Each element in the framework works together to build collective efficacy, ensuring that leadership is shared, intentional, and impactful. It's a lot to think about, but all important pieces of the school improvement planning process that we want to consider. At this time, I'm going to just turn it over to Usha, who will further explore this approach and share some insights. Thank you, Usha.
Thanks, Carla. Good morning, everyone. We have set up a space, a common space for people to capture their thinking, share their where they're at, in that you can go back to and reflect on. It's a Padlet. You'll see the QR code on the screen. And I just want to speak to it a little bit, and then I'm going to switch over to the Padlet itself in terms of sharing so we can see what's coming up. So we're hoping that as you go through this webinar and afterwards, that you are able to document your ideas regarding leadership moves. The document that we've linked to in the chat box that we're talking about today really focuses on what are the specific actions that leaders can take to create those conditions for implementation of powerful practices. And so what we hope is to acknowledge that the wisdom is in the room and that many of you are doing very innovative, impactful, and thoughtful things to move forward the thinking in your buildings. So we're going to invite you to share those leadership moves, maybe that you are doing or that you're hearing about today as our guest principals and others talk about their practices. The second column in the Padlet, where we're going to ask you to record your thinking, your ideas, is about impactful inquiry questions. I just want to take a moment. Carla's used the language of a critical inquiry approach. And so I'd like to just take 30 seconds to distinguish between inquiry, critical inquiry, and sustained critical inquiry. So inquiry is anytime we ask a question that we don't yet know the answer to. And so often in our schools, whether we're talking at the professional learning level or in classrooms, we use the language that, oh, we're engaging in inquiry. If you're engaging in inquiry, that inquiry is grounded in a question. And could everybody repeat the question that you're actually engaged in? Do we know it, or is it inferred? If we don't have a question that we're grappling with, it's not really inquiry. But inquiry could mean a question that we can easily find the answer to, like, what time does the bank open today? What we're talking about is critical inquiry, which is engaging in a question to which there isn't a obvious answer, to which there are multiple plausible options, and they require us to think critically about what we're doing and about our practice. And as Carla said earlier, in order for that critical inquiry approach to really take root, we propose sustained critical inquiry. So what is a critical question that you might engage your entire staff with over time, or that you might engage specific individuals or parts of your staff in over time, over the course of the rest of this year, over the course of all of next year, and what might those questions be? So we've created a column in the Padlet for you to capture interesting inquiry questions, critical inquiry questions, sustained inquiry questions that you hear today and that you are already using in your buildings. And finally, in the Padlet, we've asked you to capture what you're hearing about evidence of impact, or what you're working on in your own buildings in terms of what are you paying attention to assess your actions. So there's been lots of conversation already in the chat box today about data. And so inviting you to think about what are all the various ways we can collect data, not just that satellite data from 30,000 feet, but what are we paying attention to in our observations and our conversations in systematic and intentional ways? And how is that the data that we're gathering to assess our own leadership actions? So we're going to ask everybody right now, if you haven't already, to grab the QR code, or in the chat box, you'll see that there is the link. I'll put it back in again to the Padlet. Can you please open that up? I'm going to share the Padlet so you can see it unfold in front of you. And take a moment. You can see that in the bottom right-hand corner, there's this plus sign that allows you to write and add something. Sorry, not this plus sign, the plus sign underneath each of the sections. So if you have an idea, what actions can you take to create the conditions for implementation? What are some ideas for impactful inquiry questions? And what are you paying attention to? We're going to just be quiet for a moment and give people a chance to get on, to offer their comments. You can see that it's anonymous, and so you get named something interesting. For example, thank you, Mysterious Orca, for beginning our thinking together. Thanks so much for starting our thinking. We hope that you'll leave this open during the course of this webinar and add to it. We're going to return to this slide with the Padlet a couple of times before we finish, we hope, and you will have access to this afterwards as a place where you can see what other people are working on. I'm going to stop sharing and we will go back to the slide deck. Okay. So a couple of things as we're going through. We're going to start with the focus on understanding the learner that's in the document. This is obviously something that everybody is importantly and significantly focused on. And that is, as we said, the data that we're trying to figure out how to navigate and how to look at. So I'm going to invite you to just think of a few things related to understanding the learner. And as we continue through the work today and you listen to our guests, I like to say that all data is a catalyst for further inquiry. And so I invite you to think about when you examine a piece of data that makes you understand something about the learners in your building, what additional questions come as a result of that data? Where are you going to inquire further, and how might you inquire further? What else do you need to know? Um, I also invite you to think about those community voices, families, students, teachers, community members. What kind of data are we collecting? From whom are we collecting? Which voices are we hearing most often? Which voices are we not hearing regularly? There are many different forms of data. How can we use it in an equity-centered way? I also invite you to think about patterns in the data. So as you begin to look at the data, which students, the inquiry question that I always like to ask is, for which students are our current practices not working? And as we start to see a group of students, a list of students for whom our current practices are not working, what else do we know about those students? What patterns are emerging across that group of students? Demographic patterns, attendance patterns, whatever the patterns might be. Those patterns, when we see patterns in the data of for whom our current practices are not working, those patterns are a mirror. They tell us something about ourselves. So for example, if we see patterns in the early the early reading screener data that show us that many of our students who are not yet being successful in certain areas have a common characteristic, that tells us about us. It tells us we don't yet know how to instruct, how to support students with that common characteristic. And that provides a space for our learning.
Okay, on to the next slide. Thank you so much, Usha, for that. And now I'm pleased to welcome Lindsay Borden, elementary principal from Toronto District School Board. Today, Lindsay will share her school's story, highlighting an example of how she has used data to support implementation of the new language curriculum and school improvement planning. Welcome, Lindsay.
Thank you, Carla. When I stepped into my current role, I was following a principal who had been at the school for 10 years, someone who was deeply respected and trusted by the staff. So as you can imagine, that transition wasn't easy. Teachers were resistant to my leadership, hesitant about my suggestions, and instead of coming to me directly, they reached out to their union representative. The resistance was so strong that even my superintendent called me saying, "You need to win this staff over." And my response was, "It takes time. Trust isn't built overnight, it's earned through action." So I focused on being present, transparent, and approachable. I walked the halls, I listened to the teachers, and I made sure that they knew I was fair and reasonable. Over time, the resistance faded and the real trust began to grow. With that trust in place, we could begin meaningful change. One area where we saw an opportunity was in reading instruction. As a passionate teacher, introduced the right to read inquiry before it was fully implemented. And we recognized a chance to use that data to understand how explicit instruction impacts student achievement. We decided to implement reading screening from kindergarten to grade 6. Getting teachers on board, this was a collaborative effort and not a mandate. Teachers knew we were trying it out for a year, but we built in support. We provided release time for the screenings. We scheduled regular check-ins. We committed to shaping our resource support based on the data. And as you can see from this data, which we narrowed down more for the teachers as well, we needed a better model to support students needing Tier 2 and Tier 3 intervention. By assessing in both fall and winter, we progress and set benchmarks. One of our teachers had the brilliant idea of graphing the data and turning the numbers into a clear visual story. But the data alone wasn't enough. We needed real conversations. We decided to have fireside chats, small meetings with each classroom teacher, my vice principal, and our resource teacher. These weren't about judgment, they were about collaboration. We maintained trust in these conversations by highlighting what the teachers were already doing well. We kept next steps small and manageable and supported. Encouraged teachers to share their experiences. At first, some teachers were nervous, but by the end, the conversations led to meaningful shifts. One key takeaway, money-struggling students weren't making progress, and some were even falling further behind. That realization pushed us to ask, how do we better support our well below and below benchmark students? One of the biggest ideas that emerged was small group instruction, but we knew that this came with challenges, especially with behavioral dynamics. To address this, we're implementing professional development on self-regulation, helping students build the skills they need to succeed in small groups. We've scheduled release times for teachers to collaborate, making sure teachers who want to co-plan actually have the time to do it. We're running admin-led assemblies where we focus on character traits, on supporting students with character traits, while the students have a space to meet and reflect and collaborate with one another. Scheduled release time for teacher collaboration. Oh, sorry, I said that one. Junior teachers, professional development on themed picture book lessons, a structured approach to design meaningful literacy experiences. Literacy centers, engaging independent activities to support small group instruction, and also professional development to support students with dyslexia needs, equipping the teachers with the tools necessary to support struggling readers. At the core of all these changes is one thing, trust. Without it, none of this would have been possible. Trust isn't built by demanding it, it's built by demonstrating it. And because we took the time to build that trust, we're now making changes that are collaborative, sustainable, and most importantly, impactful for our students. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lindsay, for being here, first of all, today, and just sharing the story with us and reminding us the importance of trust and building that trust with your team. You can see by the quote, just that notion of co-construction of goals, and really that doesn't happen without trust. And one of the things that when we focus on this in the resource that was provided, we really looked at, valuing those diverse voices and perspectives and engaging all stakeholders to help them build a sense of shared purpose. And thank you for creating the space, obviously, for your team to be on that really positive journey of learning and obviously in agency for your students. So thank you so much, Lindsay, and thank you for sharing your story. And just as a reminder, as folks are sharing their story, this is an opportunity to go into the Padlet and share and record, document your learning, your ahas, or just reminders of what you are going to do as you move forward with your school improvement planning process. Now I have the honor of welcoming our second guest principal, and that's Andrea Carnegie. She is a coordinating principal from Peel District School Board. Today, Andrea will share her school story, highlighting the importance of student, community, and educator voice in equity-focused school improvement planning. Welcome, Andrea.
Okay, thank you, Carla. Good morning, everyone. Today I'm excited to be joining you and sharing my school story about how I basically work with my staff, my students, and community to co-construct goals for the school improvement equity planning process. I just wanted to premise it by saying that co-constructing goals is one of the most important things that you're going to do as an administrator in your school in driving the work that needs to be done around school improvement planning process. And so I'm going to be sharing the framework that I've used as a principal in my former school to basically, establish goals and basically feel free to write down, basically, as we said, jot in the Padlet, anything that you believe that you may be able to take back to your school in supporting this process. So as I mentioned, that the goal is one of the most important things. It's a driver for the conversation that you're going to be having with your educators, with your community, with your students. And so one of the first question that we need to ask ourselves when we're co-constructing goal is, why this goal? Why this time? And so we need to establish a purpose for basically setting goals. And so basically, Usha spoke this morning about, understanding our learners. Who are the learners in our school, and do they have stories? How are you listening to the stories? A lot of times when we begin to co-construct goals, we think about, like using, quantitative data. But we basically sometimes fall short and listen to the conversation. What is the story about your particular school? And so my school had a particular story. And I basically had to leverage the voices of my students and my staff who've been at that particular school and the community to share that story. So in your goal, you're going to be establishing, okay, why this goal, why this time? There is a student need. And it's very, very important that we identify that student need. And basically, the need is basically going to tell us that there's a cohort of students, or there's a pattern of students, that there's a possibility that our practices are not yet basically meeting. They're not experiencing that success. So in our goal, we're asking ourselves, whose voices are included, whose voices are missing, who's practicing our practices, basically our practices supporting, and who they're not supporting as well. So we need to begin to ask ourselves these questions. How are we leveraging educator actions in all of this? And so it's very important that when we're setting the goal, it's a whole school approach. Okay, what is the data that we're leveraging? Okay, are we leveraging the data from our community? Are we leveraging student voices? Are we basically using quantitative and both qualitative data? And basically, what are educator actions? Okay, what will our staff need to learn? Unlearn first and learn, or what do our staff need to get better at in order to support the students who are experiencing these disparities or disproportionalities? The work that we're going to undertake, how do we know that it's going to be evidence-based? How will our goal ensure that we're removing disparities for the students who are most marginalized? And in my particular school community, I serve a very diverse school population. 20% of my students were predominantly Black. And those students expressed their feelings or their thoughts about how they believe that they were experiencing literacy. And so basically, they believe that in February, they felt included, they felt recognized. However, in other months, they felt excluded. So basically, I have on my screen an example of my school literacy goal, and it's over a 3-year plan. And basically, you can actually see from my goal how we were able to identify a need for students. Okay, the students basically believe that they weren't experiencing literacy, they weren't supported, and basically, they were not experiencing success. So our goal was basically formulated around the student need, not only quantitative, but I say qualitative. Students needed to basically have their voices amplified and centered in the learning experiences in literacy in order for them to do well. So again, what our staff need to unlearn? So in my school, our staff need to really understand how to teach through culturally responsive lens. And that basically take into consideration really unpacking practices that were oppressive, and not necessarily by, through consciousness, but really unconscious bias. That practices were oppressive and that practices were basically excluding some students, and students wanted to create counter narrative of how they experience literacy. So this is an example of the goal, and it walked through the framework, student need, how we collected data, so you can actually see both qualitatively. We spoke about what the staff need to basically unlearn and what they need to learn instead, and basically what were the evidences and what were the outcomes, and also what moves I needed to make as a principal. So on the next screen, as I mentioned, that my staff at my school needed to really teach through cultural responsive lens. So as an administrator, there were certain moves that I needed to make in my building. There were certain practices that needed to be put in place in order for me to support the students who were disproportionately affected. So on the next screen, I have an example of a school artifact that I want to show you. And basically, it's a resource that I purchased at the beginning of our 3-year plan. And this is based, some of you may know this book is Goldie Mohammed, Cultivating Genius. And basically, this is the resource that we use to ground the work in terms of really unpacking our practices as educators in the building to teach you more culturally responsive lens. Okay, so basically, so this is a resource. This is a leadership move that I had to make in order to support the students who were experiencing disparities in how they experience literacy. The next slide, as I spoke about, it's very important that we're collecting, evidence of the work that we're doing. And as I mentioned, evidence does not have to take the form of quantitative data. So because our goal was really affirming student voice, because our goal was really centering the voices of the students who were, historically left out in literacy experiences in the school and were not achieving successful outcomes, one of the artifacts that we collected were student voice. How are students saying after this experience? So some of the examples that I've actually shared are some examples of student voices, of the voices of Black students that say, this is how I basically experienced literacy before. This is how I'm now experiencing literacies. So essentially what students created were counter narratives about, their experiences in the school prior to, us co-constructing this goal and starting this journey. So I'm just going to turn it over back to Carla. Sure.
My apologies. I'm trying to find my unmute button. Here we are. And I'm going to actually, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Andrea, for that. The story of, a little bit of story about your experience. And I'm actually going to pass it over to Teresa.
Thanks very much, Carla. We've inserted a slide here that we actually used during our first webinar. And it was something that Usha James had shared with us last year in one of our podcasts. And we've included this slide as a reminder about this framework, which principals have told us is a valuable framework for constructing school learning and improvement goals. And it's a valuable framework also for framing discussions around instructional practice, thinking about how we interpret the data to evolve practices based on student needs, and also considering the ways in which we may need to respond to the data through professional learning. It's my pleasure this morning to introduce Carol Pasuso from Corpus Christi with the Thunder Bay Catholic District School Board. And today, Carol's actually going to share her school improvement planning journey with us. And I know she used the framework that we've just shared with you on the previous slide. And Carol, welcome.
Thank you. As Lindsay mentioned earlier in her chat, that building trust with staff is key to any change, and the implementation of the language curriculum required a significant change in pedagogical practices, particularly Strand B and the foundational skills. And there was a definite need at Corpus Christi to build that collective efficacy with staff, so they felt valued and felt that they could together make some significant changes. It was also essential to discuss how current practices must evolve to ensure that evidence-based strategies are used intentionally in the classroom to implement the curriculum. I observed that for my junior teachers, this was a huge shift, and that they felt uncomfortable with meeting the diverse needs of students in their classrooms, particularly those working well below grade level. The board had provided evidence-based programs and PD for primary teachers the year prior, but not for junior teachers. So I felt it was important that I provided release time for one primary teacher on staff who was particularly strong and committed to the right to read for students and the new programming, to deliver PD for our junior teachers focusing on Strand B. And I asked the staff to conduct diagnostic data to determine what student learning needs were, and therefore what their learning needs were. and asked them to focus on adopting or changing one pedagogical practice and to implement explicit instruction. We also focused on exploring the need to make a shift in our assessment practices. We needed to adopt assessment strategies that provided different ways for students to show their learning to meet diverse student learning needs. And we began emphasizing triangulation, including observation, conversation, and product, and that it must reflect culturally responsive approaches. As we moved into the second year of implementation, I engaged staff in a discussion of the data that supports a responsive approach to instruction that responds to the needs of students using the framework developed by Usha James and the Critical Thinking Consortium. Affirming what current practices are having a positive impact on student learning, adjusting what current practices need to be adjusted to ensure the needs of all learners, adopting what new practices must be implemented into the curriculum practice, and abandon what practices need to be discontinued. This framework provided the opportunity for rich discussion about practices that are effective, and I challenged staff to consider what practices are no longer effective and need to be abandoned. I think this was the most difficult part of the implementation for teachers, was the abandonment of practices that they are so used to implementing, but are no longer effective and meeting the needs of students. And this is an ongoing discussion with staff. My board does not provide funding for PLCs, but I felt it was important to find a creative way to allow for a PLC for both primary and juniors. We used math buddies where the primary teachers and junior students played math games, and that allowed the junior teachers to be released in order to allow for collaboration, exploration of resources, and sharing of diagnostic tools to guide next steps in learning. And then the next month, we reversed it where the junior teachers and the junior students were engaged in the games so that primary teachers could be released. The key to success in the PLC was staff leadership. I have a primary teacher who worked temporarily as a board literacy resource teacher, and she was able to provide PD for junior teachers to support students who were struggling to learn based on results from diagnostic assessments. And she provided a template for junior teachers where they could just click on links to different activities that they could be using with these students who were struggling. When I look at the evidence of impact, we wanted to make sure that classroom timetables had explicit instruction using the provided literacy template. This template was created by a literacy resource board teacher, and it has all of the components of the explicit literacy and systematic approach to literacy, and staff is able to use it to plan out their week. They also wanted to make sure that there was the mandated use of foundational programs was evidence in the classroom. So when I do walkthroughs, I can see evidence that UFly and Haggerty and Catch Up Your Code and Morphine Magic are all being used. In the classroom, charts, displays, and manipulatives reflect foundational skills. I see sound walls. I see kids using whiteboards to work through the use of UFly and Haggerty. I see kids using magnetic letters, different activities going on in different centers that are all based on building those foundational skills for students. Student progress is monitored. We are currently in K-3 using Acadience, and the data is used to determine the next instructional steps for students. Tier 1, 2, and 3 instruction is being offered throughout the school. We have Empower reading programs for Tier 3 instruction, and the special education teacher also works with small groups on Tier 2. Sorry, just blanked out on the word. And then we have the triangulation of assessment data as well. So it's been a process, and it's ongoing. But we're finding successes along the way. Thank you.
Carol, there was a question in the chat. Do you have any specific moves that were abandoned that you could share?
We had some students or some teachers who were continuing to use whole group novel studies. And so, really trying to get them to realize that that is not meeting the needs of students. In that classroom in particular, we had students who were at a kindergarten level, and even in group, they were doing group work or collaborating. It was still difficult for them to have anything meaningful to offer because they didn't have the capacity for the level of understanding that they were at. So that was one particular move that was abandoned. I think that others are going back to getting rid of the novel studies in other ways and implementing the use of mentor texts in order to teach comprehension.
Thank you so much, Carol. Thank you to all of the principals for sharing their stories. So many excellent ideas. I've put the link back to the Padlet in the chat box, and I'm going to invite everybody to go there. And I'm also going to just for a moment share and then hand it over again for the next part. But I think there are already excellent ideas throughout the Padlet of leadership moves that could be taken, impactful inquiry questions you can use with staff, and the beginning of what might you pay attention to, and some great ideas in the chat box as well. As people are perhaps taking a moment to add some new ideas to the Padlet and taking a look there, I might share that I actually have used Padlet with affirm that these 4 questions: affirm, adjust, adopt, and abandon, with administrators and boards. And I'll just share a few things that others have said as well. Some people have said, things that they've abandoned. Of course, this might not happen in elementary, but maybe it does. Getting your test signed, adjusting marks because a student is nice or caring, the use of old textbooks, stopping blaming and judging families, the use of non-core resources or outdated resources, the removal of early dismissal and protecting instructional time. There's a lot of different ways that we can name practices that need to be abandoned. And so when you think about what does abandon mean, what are the very specific things that those practices we just shouldn't be doing anymore? And how do we arrive at those from teachers themselves? Okay, I'm going to pass it back. I will stop sharing. Oops.
Thanks very much, Usha, and thanks to all of our participating principals this morning. I know that in each of the presentations that we've had regarding school planning, we've heard the ways in which data has really played a part in setting goals, but also in interpreting and responding to data. And just one of the things that I would like to highlight from our resource, specifically in relationship to responding to data, there are a couple of things that are highlighted there that I just want to draw your attention to. First of all, you're going to notice the importance of leveraging existing structures that help build collective efficacy as you're thinking about professional learning plans and your response to data. Excuse me. And I think our principal colleagues have actually already demonstrated that beautifully. And of course, we also heard that they had to build some additional responsive opportunities for staff that engage them in collaborative learning. And it would be important as well to ensure that the structures that are being used within your school community to help you have these conversations around responding to data, that could include literacy committees or divisional teams, that those structures actually represent a range of diverse staff strength and experiences. Excuse me. There's also an emphasis in the document that we've shared with you on co-constructing professional learning content and plans alongside educators. And this allows you as leaders to do two things: to model a culturally responsive leadership style while also honoring teacher voice and teacher agency. In this slide, I've just provided two examples from the leadership document that speak specifically to leadership move and staff inquiry and learning under the subheading of responding to data. And the principal move that I've selected here could provide an entry point that delves into some of the key changes in instructional practice and pedagogy, which I think is a valuable opportunity for co-learning for staff or divisional teams. This specific move could involve, as I say, the entire staff or divisional team using a collaborative structure that invites reflection and staff input. And the questions and wonderings that emerge from those discussions, of course, could serve as an ongoing plan for professional learning. The staff inquiry question that I've highlighted here on the slide for you is an example, again, from our document that invites everyone to contribute. It's interesting as a leader to look for common areas of learning across staff or across the division. And the ideas that emerge during these discussions can also serve as a guide for professional learning. This question, I think, could also be modified and provide you with an opportunity to maybe go deeper. And rather than asking a simple question like, where is there new learning? We could have perhaps a deeper question that might include opportunities for us to think about the changes that require the most significant adjustments to our paradigm as educators around literacy instruction. The evidence of impact indicator that I have on this slide also highlights collaboration and co-learning. And you'll also notice in our document that we have included an opportunity for principal reflection, and I'm going to turn that over to Lorraine, and sorry, Lorraine, I think we've only left you with a couple of minutes to kind of sum this up for us. I apologize.
No worries. So continuous leadership reflection is necessary to ensure that progress is being made towards school improvement goals. So at this point in the school year, we look at the data we've accumulated and we consider the progress that we've already made in aligning equity goals. And we ask ourselves, what changes to teaching and learning have we made so far? And what impact are those changes having on our students and on our staff? Are the learning gaps closing? Are we making success? What leadership moves can we make next to move closer to the goals? So we look for progress towards implementation as well as progress towards learning outcomes. Have we incorporated literacy practices that address power, privilege, and bias? Are we making progress in improving the literacy outcomes for our traditionally underserved students? When we walk in our halls, when we visit classrooms, are we seeing literacy practices that reflect the voices and identities of all of our students? How can we further support educators in implementing alternative approaches to promote equity and social justice? And what further learning would benefit our staff? What further resources do they need to support practices that accommodate the diverse learning needs of students? Which educators have been our early adopters and which educators require more focused, more context-specific learning opportunities? As Vivian Robinson says, poor quality implementation is far more likely to be a matter of skill rather than of will. Now I'll pass it over to Usha one more time.
Oh, I think I'll just remind everybody to keep the Padlet open. Feel free to go back to it and share with each others and add to it as you see fit.
I'm always so surprised at how quickly time goes by, but it's almost an hour. What a full session, and thank you so much for everyone participating today. And just on behalf of our entire webinar team, we really want to thank you for your time, your engagement, and dedication. you know, every day is a busy day, but I'm sure as we lead up to March break, it's even more busy for all of you. It really has been an honor to work alongside you in this professional learning journey, and we deeply appreciate your commitment to fostering equity-driven school improvement that reaches every learner in your community. Thank you so much on behalf of your families. At OPC and CPCO, we value your insights and feedback, and we invite you to continue sharing your thoughts with us. Your reflections will help us in many ways, including learn from your experiences, refine our approach, and shape future professional learning supports to best meet your needs. You can see that there's a QR code for you to scan on the screen. We ask that you take a few minutes just to complete the short survey. It will really help us in our work. And once again, thank you to our guest principals today and for all of you. We wish you well, and we hope that you have a very restful week off next week, and definitely be well. Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone,
Okay.
for joining.
Thank you. Thank you.